You see the headlines, you follow the social media posts, but in the age of fake news and complex socio-economic global agendas, what is the role of the media in contextualizing the factual truth and garnering trust in an already disruptive society? Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on our very first Business 360 webinar today. This webinar series has come about through a collaboration between the Herald, Arena Holdings, and Astute Consulting, with the aim of exploring the issues that matter to business and leaders in our region, and also to co-create solutions through conversation and collaboration. I'd like to thank Nadeem Joshua, the General Manager of the Herald, for his vision in initiating this Media for Good platform. It really is an honor for me, Roshni Gajjar, to be hosting you this week, and co-hosting future shows with me is Paolo, who's on the panel with us today. So this is our first time on a live webcast, and we're glad to share this experience with you. It's a journey that we've started on. So we're in this together. Don't feel new and don't feel intimidated. It's as easy. You'll see you're on. I hope that you can hear us okay and you can see our visuals okay. And there's a chat room or a chat box during the course of this program. If you'd like to add your comments to it, please do. There'll also be a time for you to pose your questions, and our panel will be very glad to answer them a little bit later on. So today, the topic we're discussing is a responsive business and responsible media, the role of the media to help reignite the economy and society. A global shutdown, 6.4 million cases, 380,000 deaths, with 36,000 cases of coronavirus in South Africa as of last night. Stock market crashes, legacy institutions facing closures, mass-scale unemployment, hunger, protest, conspiracies, the list goes on. And in South Africa, the smokers can't even breathe it out, and hot grilled chicken lovers had their wings clipped just for a little bit. And in these troubled times, in South Africa, we couldn't even find solace in our churches or social and sporting groups. This is a catastrophe. And during times of uncertainty and catastrophe, we all stay gripped to various sources of news, expert opinions, and social media platforms. And yet, the pervasiveness of fake news and filtered reporting is deepening the uncertainty and mistrust across the society. In a survey done about a year ago across 34 countries, and media executives from those 34 countries responded to the survey, as much as 29% of people said that they choose not to listen or watch the news only because of the level of mistrust. The role of the media is an important one, and that is a triangulation between public interest, independence, and garnering the trust of its readers and subscribers. If you've been following the news in the last 2 years, Trump has changed the way political leaders share information and opinions. You may have been following the spate between Twitter, Facebook, and Donald Trump, and this week he signed an executive order saying that Facebook and Twitter, we should be reconsidering whether social media platforms, as distributors of public information rather than publishers of the content, can uphold their public status as it is at the moment. In South Africa, we haven't been immune to this. In 2018-19, we've seen evidence of political interference in the media on cases such as the ANN7 saga. Internationally, the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica case last year also made its way into the papers, but also straight through to an inquiry commission. Where did this all begin? In the 18th century, newspapers were the main source of information. In the 20th century, it then moved into broadcast by radio and TV. And in the 21st century, the internet. Interestingly, 30 years after the invention of the World Wide Web, most professional journalism is still funded by newspapers. 90% of published revenues worldwide still come from print and now digital sources. But research also shows that more than 75% of under 35s across those 35 countries are starting to find news via news engines. So the business model of media is changing rapidly. The source of news is no longer controlling the distribution of news necessarily. And this raises issue of upholding trust and public accountability. So on that, with that context in mind, then we really are fortunate today to have editors of two of South Africa's oldest newspapers in the country with us on the panel today. So welcome Rochelle de Kock, Chiara Carter, and Paolo Giuricich. Rochelle de Kock from the Herald, Chiara Carter from the Daily Dispatch in East London, and Paolo representing Smarter EQ. Hello, panel.
Hi, Roshni.
Great to have you with us today, and thank you for making the time.
Thank you. Thanks, Roshni.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Rochelle and Chiara, it's not often that we get the opportunity to be up close and personal with our editors. You're normally behind your pens or behind your opinion pieces column. So really, really glad to have you today. So if we're looking at the business of media, tell us a little bit about the operational model of a print media company. How does it work? And when we're looking at the triangulation of public interest, independence, and finding the factual truth, who's responsible for upholding the governance in media to make it responsible outside of politics and perhaps big business advertising spend? Then when one looks at the constitutional right of freedom of speech, how do you go about upholding responsible journalism, protection of journalists' interests, and also preventing biased reporting?
Should go first. Okay. Look, Roshni, I think for the most part, let me first start by saying thanks for having us. It's quite strange to be sitting on this other side and having to answer questions when we're normally the ones doing the asking. But I think just to start off with the first part of your question, I think nobody really understands just what a big operation it is to put out that newspaper that you will see out on the streets every day, or whether it's via e-edition and so on. But it's quite a big operation, and we actually recently did a video showcasing this, where it really just starts from early in the morning with the journalists pitching the stories, and there's a whole process, and in the editors that sit through morning and afternoons, and we interrogate some of the stories that have been pitched, and come up with perhaps looking at how do we further delve into stories of the day or things that might be popping up throughout the day, and those are interrogated throughout the day. And then you have the sub-editing process, and it's the night teams, the layout, and throughout the day we're populating the website. So it's quite a big operation. And then in the evenings, it gets printed, a circulation team takes over, they start delivering the paper, and we do it all again the next day. So it's quite a big operation, and it's dozens and dozens of staff, that are involved in that process. But I think just going into what you were talking about, like what then governs a media institution. I mean, I think for every journalist, the fundamental right to be able to tell news and to do so independently is something that we really hold dear as a news organization, as the Herald. And it's something that in South Africa is something we're so proud of. And I think but with that right comes responsibility, and a big responsibility, and being able to put news out there that is factual, that is credible, that is educational, and a whole list of other things. It really comes with a big responsibility, which is why I started off by telling you just what a process it is, because it goes through an entire interrogation process. It's not just a journalist comes up with the idea, they type it out, and out you go, it's out onto the street. There's really just like a team of people that are sitting and constantly making sure that we adhere to our Bible, which is the press code. It guides us, throughout the day, and every decision that we make. And that's ultimately, I think, how we go about it. And at all times, we just, try to strive to ensure that we have quality journalism, and that we produce news that is credible, that is fair, that is accurate, and taking things beyond just what we would call like your quick breakers, the things that will drive people to your website. Yes, those are important. They're important for our numbers, but more than that, we need to take the story beyond those quick breakers, and just to give that quality news. Like, what does it mean for the Joe Schmo on the street? What does it mean for the lady that is sitting in Motherwell and the lady that's sitting in Utnag? Those are the kind of things that we grapple with every day, and we do it every day, and we just, it's something that it's very sacrosanct to us.
Chiara, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, look, if we're talking about how we ensure that news is fair, we've got a code, or a press code, that we need to abide by. We have, journalists have training in ethics. What I emphasize is that we try to get as many voices as possible on a story. It's not everybody always is willing to comment, but you have to seek that comment. And I personally don't believe in a truth. I think there are many ways of understanding stories, and that's why you need a multiplicity of voices. At the Dispatch, we would also seek out the voices of ordinary people, the kinds of people who aren't always heard in the noise of public debate, and hear the story from the ground up, which is quite challenging in current circumstance where you have to be distant. And I think that newspapers and all media organizations make mistakes. And if we do, my approach is to acknowledge it and to put the facts out there as soon as possible, to be absolutely open and transparent with our readers and our audience, because trust is the essential thing that makes people associate with the brand and come to you in times of trouble. Like currently in the pandemic, we've seen a huge audience surge because people are bombarded with information that's quite confusing, and they need to hear what is going on from someone they trust. So it's a kind of a discourse with your community, and they don't always love you, but they hear what the stories you're putting forward. I'm not sure if that answers you. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Chiara. That helps us better understand, your world and your business model. And a follow-up question to that, I mean, you cued it, and that is that during this time, how have you remained anchored to your purpose? Because each newspaper or publishing house has an editorial narrative that they're trying to put forward. And also, how has this changed environment impacted your revenue streams, your subscriber base? And if it's grown, is it paid subscriptions, or are they accessing it via those search engines that we spoke about in the preamble? Rochelle?
For us, it's like Chiara was
Rochelle,
saying,
yeah.
We definitely saw a massive increase on our websites, people hungry for news, and really just, there's so much fake news out there. And you mentioned it in the beginning, Roshni, that there's so much fake news out there that people are really looking to established news organizations such as the Herald and the Daily Dispatch, particularly in the Eastern Cape, that will be able to tell them, okay, this is the news, and this is verified, and this is credible information. And that's something that we took very seriously, that I have to mention, we took very seriously. And then also, we took a stance that it's so important for us just to ensure that we remain true to who we are as a brand. And for the most part, I think, there's nothing in the city that we shouldn't know about. Well, let me say, nothing in Nelson Mandela Bay that the Herald shouldn't know about. And I think that's something that we really strive to do. We try to to give as much as possible so that people could understand, okay, in my area, particularly during the first few weeks of the pandemic, in my area, there are X amount of cases of, positive cases of coronavirus or COVID-19. And so we continued so that we really, and those are the things that we saw people genuinely wanted to read. Those were the stories. But then the narrative started to change after a while because people became so bombarded with all the bad news. They were asking, okay, please tell us the recoveries. And we really do take guidance, if I may say, from our audiences and in making decisions also about some of the news that we put out there, because they needed stories of hope. And that's what we then started to do. We started to track down the families or the people that have recovered, from this virus, just to show that it's not necessarily a death sentence for everybody. There are those stories of hope, but then also just to be able to document really what it is, the struggles that they went through, so that people can really understand that this is a very serious matter. And I think that, as a media, we really had a responsibility, really a big responsibility for us to do that. But then also trying to tell the stories of those families who did lose loved ones. And I have to be honest with you, Roshni, it hasn't been easy. With COVID-19, there's quite a very bad stigma. And we're finding particularly people, in our township areas who do not want to speak because they don't want to be identified as the coronavirus family. And so that has really, there's been requests, that these are more than figures, these are more than just statistics. Tell us who these people are. And we had to balance that with the people's right to have, their family not mentioned, if the family didn't want the name of their mother mentioned in the paper because they fear the stigma from the community, we really had to balance that and take that into consideration, because it is a relatively new virus and people still don't understand it. And yeah, so from that perspective, that's how we dealt with it. But then also, as a business, we suddenly found ourselves in uncharted territory. I mean, you would know that the media, for the most part, we rely on advertising, to keep us afloat. And businesses were closing. What is the first thing they cut when they start closing? It's normally marketing and advertising. And we had to quickly say, okay, how are we going to then implement plans that were already in place, but how are we going to start implementing them properly, to start having subscription-based models? And that is something, if I'm honest, is something we're working on, so that we become really a business that is just not overly reliant on ad revenue spend, a business that relies also on subscriptions and turning all those clicks and all those likes into paid subscriptions. So that is something that we're still working on, and we've got like massive plans to do that. So yeah, that's from our side.
Yeah, you also, the affordability factor also comes in at a time when news is your source of information and you go to your local newspaper to understand what's going on in your immediate area. To sign up for a subscription currently, when you're not quite sure where jobs, etc., are going to go to, that is quite challenging. Kiara, I mean, what has been the experience from the Daily Dispatch's side, on the other side of the Eastern Cape, and particularly let's focus on the business model. I mean, what have you seen with subscriptions, and how does an event like this impact your revenues? So, for example, I'm sure most people went online because you physically couldn't go to a shop and buy a newspaper at times, or drive past your favorite street newspaper person and pick up the paper on the way to work. How did this all change?
I think in some ways the Dispatch has been lucky in that our circulation didn't plummet in the way that I think other newspapers experienced, our print circ. We retained not the same amount, but a fairly decent sales circ. The digital audience skyrocketed. I mean, it went up by millions. It's now calmed down a bit. The level 5, it was unbelievably high. That's not necessarily revenue because, as you say, a lot of people aren't subscribing, and the advertising you get on digital doesn't amount to the same amount you get in the print edition. So the kind of challenge we have now taken forward for a business, because obviously during lockdown, a lot of businesses were closed and they didn't advertise. However, I must say our big retail advertisers stood by us the whole way through, and they advertised and continue to do. And in a way, that's like a vote of faith in A, what we can do for them, but B, in supporting the press and supporting media. What the challenge now is really the challenge that faces media everywhere in the world. How do you translate a digital audience into a paid subscriber base? We're kind of working on that. You know, you've got to build the trust. You've obviously got to give people a value proposition. And you have to know your audience and keep in contact with them, which are all kind of challenges going forward.
Yeah, so Chiara, just the first part of the question, and Rochelle, what does the Herald stand for? What is your purpose if you had to frame it for our readers? And Chiara, how would you describe that for the Daily Dispatch?
Okay, Rochelle, you going first?
You go ahead, Chiara. Sorry.
The Dispatch stands for fearless reporting, going into all aspects of our society and holding a mirror to the society, providing a voice for all sides of our society in a debating space on our opinion pages and in our events, where people can debate very different ideas, because the Eastern Cape has a long history. That's an intellectual history and an activist history. We also stand for building our region, and I think we're quite unashamed about that. We have big challenges: unemployment, small businesses that are struggling to grow, entrepreneurs who need a leg up, and we try to provide advice and also to host events where we can introduce people to ideas and to networking.
Okay. Rochelle, briefly from your side, what does the Herald stand for?
Look, I think Chiara's said a lot of it, but I think for the most part, you know, as she said, is we really are, I think, activists, and I say that also unashamedly. You know, we really just rally for the residents of the city, and we open up a space also for debate, and it's really, that's what it is. Yeah.
Great. So Paolo, I mean, at the heart of all this is people. What struck me during this coronavirus lockdown period is that we spoke about the economic devastation, the socioeconomic challenges, etc., the burden of being in lockdown. And at the end of the day, what it highlighted was that people are at the heart of every system and every structure that's been created around us. You've got a really interesting background, a qualified chartered accountant, a gig economy entrepreneur in your own right, and an organizational development expert. Paolo, you've done transformation projects and worked with organizations across more than 30 countries. So you've probably seen organizations try to deal with change. Never has there been one of this proportion. Share with us your perceptions and observations from the lockdown period.
Thank you, Roshni, and good afternoon to all our people tuned into the webinar. So yes, I mean, what I'm really struck by is the conversation around how the media business is changing during this time, which is really not too dissimilar to a lot of changes that a lot of businesses have gone through during the ages. But as you very rightly said, the contracted period in which this has happened has been unprecedented, really. And so in terms of what we've noticed from an organizational perspective, and really at quite a human level, is the existential crisis that each and every person in the world faces by this COVID pandemic. And so what we have been seeing is that people have been questioning many, many different things about themselves, about their societies, about the communities, their families, friends, and it's really rocking people to the core. So I suppose what also happened, given the lockdown, was that it was very sudden. Most people were really not too in tune with what was happening across the globe already, through China and Italy mainly to start. And when our lockdown happened, it happened very suddenly. And obviously people had never experienced or even heard the word lockdown before. And so this was all very, very foreign to people. As people started to settle into the change, because they had really had no option. It was legislated, it was declared, and we had to go into the lockdown to flatten the curve. What people started to realize was learning opportunities that existed. So the silver lining, and maybe this is a word that's been overused during this time, is that people have had time, perhaps not the best time ever, but they've had time to think about themselves, in relation to their work, and in relation to the systems that surround them. And so this learning has really happened. But on the flip side of that is a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, and a lot of panic. And so what we're starting to see is a rise in the mental health issues of people through this pandemic, even those obviously who have not been affected by the virus yet or have not had it. So there's quite a juxtaposition there, because I suppose the media has been portraying a lot of the bad news. So I'm not going to refer specifically to the Herald and the Daily Dispatch, but if you look at the international media, CNN and the likes of that, I mean, it's just in your face about how bad this is. And of course it is bad, but there's ways of working through it and being able to manage through this. So what we've seen happening is that a lot of people often through traumatic experiences get something called post-traumatic stress disorder. But what we're starting to see is pre-traumatic stress disorder. People are starting to have disorders around stress of things that they think might come and might happen. And because it is so unknown, and from a day-to-day basis, we don't know what's going to happen, people let their fantasies run wild as to what could happen and what the impact could be. So we sit with multiple realities across the working world about COVID. And I guess it really depends on whether you are able to work from home or not. And the experience would be very different. In terms of the impacts on people in the workplace, is that if people were able to work from home, they threw themselves into it. And this became one of the biggest global experiments, one of the biggest global social experiments is how could we work from home, or how could we work virtually? And, you know, we talked about the fourth industrial revolution for many, many years, and then it happened in one instant. And that had certain ramifications for people. So sudden change resulted in people having to live within their home systems, work within their home systems. Some people had to even homeschool their children, or rather, should I say, home-based learning for their children. And so all the social systems came together into one place, and the divide between them and the boundaries started to become very, very blurred. But some of the other impacts that I think are really important is that people need to consider how to really make sense of what's happening. And the making sense is really your ability to talk about things. So coupled with the media, the input that you have from an educative perspective from the media, you can start to have discussions, which I guess we would never really have had these discussions 3 or 4 months ago. There are words that we never knew existed that suddenly exist. Things like lockdown, things like social distancing, which makes no sense. It needs to be physical distancing. Epidemiologists, virologists, all these different types of experts and scientists out in the field. So it's really an educative learning experience for me, and people need to really talk about it and make sense of what some of those anxieties might be and some of those fears might be. But the silver lining is really the fresh outlook and the fresh perspective. So look at the Herald and the Daily Dispatch, thinking about how they grow their revenue streams in a different way, how they portray their news through virtual platforms as opposed to in the print edition. And so only good can really come out of this experience if we take a positive approach. And I think we have to take a positive approach because the alternative is just not that good.
So Paolo, I mean, this week, thank you for that. This week we've entered lockdown 3, which is a little bit more relaxed than 5 and 4. And some businesses are starting to re-enter the economic activity zone. You know, you've alluded to the fact that we've got new acronyms, etc. I think if you'd asked executives in your organization as an employee, give me flexible working hours, or can I work from home and Zoom into meetings? You know, they would have possibly used 3 letters, which sounds like work from home. But now that's all changed, and you're 100% right. That fourth industrial revolution, that was kind of a medium-term risk, we're in it right now. So we're in the change of societal norms right now. What advice or what should business leaders and owners think about as they re-enter the economy for the next 6 months to a year? How do you reimagine human capital and the normal 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 office working day? How has that shifted? Because what I find, sorry, Paolo, what's important in what you described earlier is that as much as there's this external transformation in a disruptive manner, something's changing because it's had to change inside of each one of us. And your work is about the transformation organization, but also the transformation internally. So there's that connect where 2 minds and 2 purposes meet and align so that a broader agenda can be mobilized. So you were an executive, how would you approach a re-entry?
So it's so interesting that you use the word re-entry, because I suppose the word re-entry almost feels like you're going back to something. And I'm not actually sure if you are actually going back to something. So I want to use this analogy for any business, because I think this is really important. Each and every person's had, call it 2 months at home, working from home. They've reprioritized a lot of things in their life because they've had to, not because they wanted to. They've asked a lot of questions of themselves, and now they go back into, let's call it a physical workspace. They return to the office. So what managers or leaders will find is that each person that re-enters comes with a different context, comes with a different level of experience through this lockdown. So, if I think about my own experience of lockdown, I already had a home office because I've worked from home in my business for a few years now, and I work mainly at my clients. So I've always had a home office. So for me to transition to working from home was a relatively seamless thing. I had an office, I was ready to go. But a lot of people didn't have that. So there's a lot of trauma associated with the experience that people had in this work from home space. So they come to the office, they may be part of a larger team, and what happens is they're a different person. However, leadership might expect them to pick up from where they left off 2 months ago and keep going. And so for me, as a leader, the important thing is really to work with what is and to really understand each person's journey through this COVID experience and this pandemic. That ability to understand experience of each person will allow you to broaden and deepen the relationships. And then things can start to emerge. This level of humanness needs to come through. It's not a time of micromanagement. It's not a time of command and control, but it's really to allow people to express their vulnerabilities and make sense of that, and then clear the pathways to be able to have some constructive decisions as to how you go. I believe the 9 to 5 is probably gone, in all truth.
Quite interesting, and it's quite a mind shift. And it's going to be interesting to have these types of conversations and co-creation models. Hopefully it goes down that route with our trade unions, just to see where the receptivity around these issues lie. So just some comments from our participants then. An interesting question from Jonathan Clark. How do media companies change public perceptions in the era of fake news and the growing mistrust, etc.? And another interesting comment that in the UK, for example, it revealed that during this pandemic, people trusted the information from government sources more than from media sources. And Rochelle and Chiara, how does that make you feel as editors of a newspaper?
Look, from, it's quite a difficult situation. I think for us as a media, we've had no choice but to get our information from the government. For the most part, that is basically the source of where all the data has been centralized. And it doesn't make me, initially, yes, one feels uncomfortable, but I think for the most part, the government has really been phenomenal in the way they've been communicating, particularly from a national level, and just continuously keeping the nation informed and, talking about being frank really about some of the challenges. And I think that's one of the things that really has emerged from this, is to say, for me, I think the way they've handled it and just the communication, particularly at a national level, has just been phenomenal. And I think the way we've handled it as a media organization is to, there's a lot of fake news. You get the WhatsApps, you get, the Twitter. Sometimes you'll get some people that would post stuff out there. But it's so important for us to constantly verify and being able to do so that we can put it out there to the public, and just so that they can trust the information that they're getting.
Yeah. So to those participating, we'd actually love to hear, following on from Paolo, how your home and work life has transformed and is changing. And we'll read those comments out a bit later. Also remember that we will be taking some questions also later on. So, Chiara and Rochelle, when one thinks of the media industry and journalists, it's very action-oriented, dynamic, on-the-scene reporting. And to me, the journalist who's closest to the action is able to provide the context and the texture of the stories to make them come to life for us. How has that worked out during lockdown? Have field journalists been allowed to go out with their camera crews, etc.? And with remote working, how have you as editors managed to uphold the quality and relevance of the stories that have come out?
Look, it has been very different. Our reporters have been going out. We have had quite strict rules around their using protective equipment, social distancing, sanitizing, and so on. Those kinds of regimens are anathema to many reporters who've had to get used to it. Reporters tend to be quite happy-go-lucky, and now they're having to pay attention to tiny detail because it's very important for everyone's health. Obviously, just the fact of social distancing, using a mask, or if you're in broadcast, standing at a distance with a microphone, puts you at a step removed from people. It makes it a little bit more difficult to be close. So we've had to overcome those kinds of things. I, as an editor, don't like telephone journalism, but in this situation, we've been encouraging reporters, if you don't have to go out, do the story on the phone. So it's quite a reverse of the usual. Our reporters have been very brave. It's quite scary going out there, especially when lockdown first began. People didn't really know what to expect. And I mean, I admire the young reporters who've never had to deal with anything like this and have absolutely come to work, gone out to do stories, worked overtime, just stunning. We vet stories the same way as we always do, I find I'm working much longer hours, and I miss going for smoke breaks and coffee breaks and I'm just sitting at a screen going through stories and speaking to people on Zoom all day long. I think we've had some fantastic stories during this period. It's really surprised me. And those stories haven't just been COVID-19 related, because obviously life goes on and there are lots of other things happening, especially now as we move gradually out of total lockdown.
So Chiara, catastrophes aren't new to our world. We've been through many before, and normally history is defined by transformative events that changes how society functions, how businesses operate, how institutions are governed. This is one unusual incident which has impacted 7 billion people on Earth, and no one has left excluded from this. During this period, there have been so many stories, good and bad, that have emerged. How do you go about balancing stories and giving the right context between local news, national news, global news, and keeping people engaged and interested?
Look, obviously, we're talking about two different mediums here. In print, there's a finite number of stories you can present every day. Digital has a fantastic opportunity in that you can put so much more out there, so much more of world. We do a lot of Africa and business news, multimedia. So digital, it's almost, as long as it's accurate, the sky's the limit. You can put a whole lot out there, you just paste it out. To choose for the print edition, it's experience, you know, it's over the years learning what appeals, what sells, what doesn't. And often readers will let us know, they'll moan. They'll say you've got too much about Joburg, not enough about East London, or too much about Nelson Mandela Bay or whatever. And understanding that a newspaper has to be a balance. It has to entertain, it has to inform, it has to present politics, political stories, it has to reflect the big stories of the day. So, and it has to have some local heroes. So it's a mix. And actually, if you get the crosswords wrong or the cartoons wrong, that's what readers are really going to get upset about. The rest, they'll give you a bit of leeway.
So to all three of you, I mean, what have the emerging leadership themes been during this period? Chiara, from your side, you know, on the Buffalo City area, Rochelle in the Nelson Mandela Bay, and then Paolo, also from your experience in the corporate and organizational space, what are leaders starting to think about? And from your editorial desks, with the stories that have emerged, what would you put on the agendas for discussion at the political, business, and community leadership levels? Rochelle, should we start with you?
Look, I think one of the things, if I interpret your question correctly, one of the things that for me that's emerged is that I think there needs to be proper or better preparation for disasters. If there's one thing that we've picked up is that, you know, in the Eastern Cape, you know, we have our challenges. The Eastern Cape has always had, we've got challenges with education, we've got challenges with all sorts of things. And I think one of those things that have emerged there is that the Eastern Cape's infrastructural challenges have definitely played, I think, a big role in how it's managed to really respond to this pandemic. And I think, you know, you know, even with Nelson Mandela Bay, I would say, you know, just being prepared, I think, for something like this, for a disaster like this, I think the city has done fairly okay. But one of the big things I think that have come out that we've seen is there really needs to be improved communication, I think, from, you know, at a very local level. That's something that we really struggled with, just getting, you know, very localized information and just having access to that information. And I think from a media perspective, something that emerged for us is that we really need to invest in our health reporting, and just getting, you know, investing in our staff in making sure that they get to understand, so that we in situations like this, And you know, we've seen over the years with the juniorization of newsroom, these kind of things then start to pop up when you are in pandemics or in really stressful situations like this. But that's something that's definitely emerged, you know, from us as a media organization that we need to take to heart.
Paolo, from the organizational and corporate side, have you seen any emerging themes that you'd put on the agendas of board directors and executives?
Absolutely. I think this pandemic has really created an opportunity to do things differently. And so when we talk about doing things differently, it may not be the actual product that gets sold in a business. That might stay the same, but it's really about the people. And the people, we need to think about treating people like adults, because we don't tend to do that in the workplace. People are adults, people are responsible, and working from home has proved for the large part that people can actually do it. And not need to be micromanaged. The other thing for me is really about building renewed trust and deeper relationships. We've been, with people working from home, we've been invited into people's home through the ways we've had to communicate virtually. And so there's been some level of degree where people have exposed themselves and allowed the relationship to get bigger. But now it's about building a renewed trust and developing a deeper relationship. When people play to their purpose and their vision, they will be much better employees for companies. The other thing for me is boundaries, and the boundaries between work and life and how we manage those, and the new boundaries that need to exist when people start trickling back to the workplace, because things are different. Things will never be the same. You're not going back to the old of business. You're going back to something new. And for me, it's really about co-creation. So just to give an example, I was chatting to one of my clients earlier this week. And ordinarily, we sit and think, okay, these are the challenges. This is what we need to do for this group of people. And then we got to the point where we said, well, let's actually pose the challenge to them and let them come up with the creative solution of how they're going to deal with this. And that's really where the learning piece comes in for people, and the growth and development comes in, is allowing people to co-create things as opposed to being told how things are going to work. And businesses that get this right from a culture perspective, from a strategy perspective, are the ones that are going to really thrive and survive during this time. If the others hang on to the old, they'll be on their way out even quicker.
So Paolo, an important bit of strategy, it's great creating realistic strategies, but it's even more important implementing them and tracking the effectiveness and the efficiency of that implementation. So during this time, managers, leaders, and employees were all trying to work as best as they could from home. Performance management becomes hell of important during a phase like this. It's you trying to measure productivity levels. You're trying to monitor, are people putting in the fair share of work, because we haven't yet gone into a work environment where it's outcomes driven rather than time invested. How did you see that playing out during lockdown with the business leaders that you've been engaging with?
Well,
and if not, how do you see that going forward in the next 12 to 18 months?
Well, it's interesting, because I think I've seen both ends of the spectrum in that question. So the companies that are very outcomes based, this just was part of their culture already. And so working from home was really the next logical step that they probably would have taken a year or two to get to. So that worked absolutely fine. But those that didn't have expended a huge amount of energy trying to command and control this whole thing. So from a performance perspective, my wish to people out in the workplace right now, and leaders, and going back to the workplaces, is to suspend the notion of performance management for the moment. Take a very human approach, allow people to grow back into something that is different. And productivity will always be there at the end of the day, and one will always need to measure it. But I don't think that the focus should be on productivity right now. Just be human with people. Acknowledge the experience that they've had and go from there to co-create new ways of doing things.
Absolutely, Paolo. And that is absolutely the intent, I think, that sits on any manager's priority. you have to balance that against the business objectives. You know, businesses are looking to survive at the moment before they can consider thriving beyond, let's say, December or the end of tax year in February next year. And how does one really channel that balance and get the best fit? So Chiara and Rochelle, you know, in your spaces, how has this panned out during lockdown, and how have you adapted your human capital management culture just to ensure that business carries on in an effective and efficient way, but you're still delivering responsible journalism? Have there been any changes from your side?
Look, I actually have always thought that journalists should be given as much rope as they can have, hopefully not to hang themselves. But I believe in trusting people, not micromanaging, and encouraging independence. And what I've really seen in this period is how strong a team we've built at the Dispatch, because I was astonished at how we all just got on with it, how well we've communicated, and how hard people have worked, and new creative ideas that have come to the fore. So for me, it's actually been a positive. I think other aspects, because I mean, a newspaper isn't just the journalists and the photographers. You know, there are people who sell advertising, there are people who answer the phones, there are people who keep the books. Other aspects of the business, it's been more difficult for some people. Obviously, ad reps haven't been able to go out there. Marketing has had to start looking at these kinds of events rather than having a whole lot of people in the Guild Theatre. So there have been changes then. I think some of the learning curve of hosting virtual events and so on, I think we'll carry with us as we go forward. In the newsroom, yeah, it's not a 9-to-5 exercise, so it's fine. Rochelle?
Sorry, Rochelle. So from your side, thank you, Chiara. It's a really interesting space. So Arena Holdings, which is your holding company, has recently become the owners of the Herald and Daily Dispatch. You yourself are new in your desk. And the Herald have moved their offices recently from its old building into a brand new open plan airy space. There are a lot of changes. How have your employees coped, and what's the mood like with this added change?
Look, you know, it's, as you said, it's just been one big whirlwind of a year. You know, I actually am, you know, as Chiara says, you know, I'm so proud of everybody and the way they've just taken, you know, this on. And there's really been this attitude of, you know, we're in the business of documenting history at the moment, so let's give it our best shot. I mean, this is the story of our lifetime. And, you know, for many of the young journalists. And I think, you know, that has definitely been the positive attitude. We haven't had to sit and, you know, found ourselves having to performance manage anyone. You know, I think as difficult as it is to work from home, because many of us have, you know, children and all sorts of other, you know, personal issues. But for the most part, I mean, we got on with it, and you know, they just got the story out there. There are some of the journalists that are able to go out, and they, you know, they observe the social distancing and so on. But you know, they've been going out and they've been really phenomenal, and we really built like a real good, phenomenal team. I definitely have to say, and we're just having to embrace technology. I mean, it's a way of doing things where, you know, we're relying on, you know, your Zooms and your WhatsApps and constantly communicating. So just doing things really differently. And if I may just quickly just touch on, you know, as Chiara was saying, you know, just during the lockdown, we decided to, you know, be more than just giving information out there. We just wanted to entertain. And so we did a lot of entertainment and edutainment, I would call it, videos where we had story time for children, some cooking classes. It's just to get, you know, more more eyes on our site, yes, but also just, everybody was going through a really difficult period, particularly during the first 3 weeks. And so we use that opportunity with those extra eyes on our sites to have those things out there. And then we also had, Arena had the United Apart campaign, and, just putting together this documentary, telling the South African lockdown story, just embracing it. And I think we've all just taken it head on.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Well done for you for entering a new space and your new seat. And I think you were saying to me earlier, 2 weeks into it, all this changed. And, the theme is that it is uncertain times. It is uncomfortable, but we're living in history. And the co-creation piece is vital. And during this process, I mean, there was a huge erosion of trust before lockdown happened globally. And now is possibly the time to look at that more critically, because the priorities around accelerating the solutions is certainly here today. So, Paolo, from your side, we are mindful of time. We've got about 5 minutes left in this conversation. Do you want to do a wrap and just share with us what advice you would give to organizational leaders and executives, and where is the best starting point for this new normal from a people perspective?
So it's very interesting. I was talking to one of my clients the other day, and they keep making changes and making big announcements about their changes. And that as soon as they make an announcement, new information comes to light, and they have to pull back the announcement and make a new announcement. So for me, everything is really emerging, and we need to be able to lean into that emergence and understand that we take it day by day. And my wish for leaders, managers, and people going into the workplace is to take it day by day. Go slow, and things will slowly shape and change. Please be very intentional in the way that you show up as a person. Express your own vulnerabilities. Show courage, because that will open it up for everybody else in the various companies to be able to do that. There's nothing about going back to something old. It has changed, it has shifted, the system is very, very different, and we need to adapt and learn how we work with that. Bearing in mind still that the stress of the pandemic is not gone either. We have not hit our peak in South Africa, and it could still get a whole lot worse. And so the ability to support people through this time becomes imperative. What I'd also like people to think about is the various interconnected systems that exist around their businesses and within their businesses, because one decision here has an impact here. And we need to be mindful that those impacts are positive all around. And that will help the global ecosystem to recover from a business perspective.
Thanks, Paolo. I like that. I like the lean-in principle, which speaks to co-creation. And, our accountants and governance experts have been talking about the whole philosophy of integrated thinking and integrated problem solving. And now really is the time to think in this manner and work in this manner. To the editors, where to now for the Herald and Daily Dispatch to stay in business, keep your business model sustainable, and also deliver on the factual truth and in the greater public interest. And also, if we can bring it back to what we're doing today and what we're birthed today, is the Business 360 webinar, and how does this platform serve your objective to that intent?
If I may just say, Roshni, for us, we're going to maintain, what it is we stand for, and that's quality journalism. And we continue to do that and providing the content. But with that said, we got a lot of exciting things, that we've got planned, and subscription models that we're going to be pursuing, creating membership communities, and really just being creative in how we try to, to be more reliant on subscriptions as a revenue base. But I think also, we've seen quite a bit, and it's a really opportunity for us.
If I can kind of ask you just to give us 3 points that are coming through from the Herald, and then we'll give Kiara a chance. Sorry to interject.
No, that's fine. Look, as I said, it's just creating, membership communities, pushing a subscription base, but then with having the content that matches. And with the Business 360 events, we really just want to create this platform where we can be able to provide advice and create these conversations for businesses, and just at a grassroots level. And and this one more thing is just to this campaign that Arena is working on at the moment in getting South Africa back to work, and SMME funding, but I think more information will come at a later stage. So it's just using our businesses, various businesses internally, to serve our business as a local. That's something that we're definitely focusing on.
Thank you, Rochelle. Keen to hear more about the SME platform. Chiara, would you like to add anything else to that from your side?
What the Dispatch has, what we've seen emerge from this is that the Dispatch is resilient. We've come through, we're pretty much getting back to where we were. That isn't where we want to stop. We've seen possibilities such as digital. We're going to move in that direction. We've also need to keep the trust of our audience and the province. And part of that is by providing advice to people and information. The regrowth of business, those are people who want to seize new opportunities in small business. We need to provide some form of a platform for that. I think I'll leave it there.
Thanks very much, Chiara. Thank you, Rochelle and Chiara and Paolo. It's really been an interesting conversation, and we've even run out of time on our first webinar. So thank you for being there. And I hope that the listeners today have had a chance to connect with the editors. And hopefully that gives you a slightly different context when you're reading that opinion piece. Thank you very much. We had about 76 participants and more today. It was really amazing to be able to share this platform with you. This is our first one. We want to connect, engage, and build a Business 360 community to discuss and debate the information and insights that matter to you, the listeners. So we'd love to hear your feedback. Please leave your comments in the chat box or the chat room, and Pila, Berna, and Tejo will pick them up a little bit later on. We certainly will get through them and give them careful consideration. A link to this webinar will be mailed to you. Please do feel free to share it amongst your network. Follow the Herald, follow the Daily Dispatch feeds and social media posts. And remember that the journalists have to be paid, so please do subscribe. You can connect with me, Roshni Gajjar, on LinkedIn or through our stratastute.co.za platform. And before I go, in whatever you plan, decide, or do, let purpose and sustainability steer your business strategy. Stay safe and have a lovely evening. See you next time. Bye-bye.